Imagine standing in front of, like, a glass display case, right? And you're looking at this masterfully crafted, grand, complication mechanical watch.
Wow, yeah. A real piece of art.
Exactly. You can see the microscopic gears, the hand-beveled edges, the perfectly calibrated tourbillon just spinning away. And your immediate reaction is just absolute awe. You look at that object and you think, I want that.
Right. Which is, a totally natural human impulse. We are completely wired to appreciate the synthesis of complex final results.
Yeah.
It commands our attention. It triggers this immediate desire for ownership.
And this is the catch, if someone were to walk up to you right then, hand you a pair of tweezers, a magnifying loupe, and like a pile of 300 microscopic metal shavings, and they just said, great, go sit at that workbench in silence for the next 400 hours and build it.
Yeah, your reaction would be wildly different.
Literally the opposite. Yeah. You'd likely run in the opposite direction.
Because in that moment, the illusion just completely breaks. You're suddenly forced to confront the invisible, painstaking labor behind the beauty.
Right.
We deeply crave the final product, but honestly, we are terrified of the process.
And that tension, that exact friction between loving a result and actually surviving the process to get there is exactly what we are exploring in today's deep dive.
It's a great topic.
We're looking at the boundaries of our own passions. Like, how do you know when you actually want to do something versus when you just want to have something?
Right. It's a crucial distinction.
And our source for this discussion comes from a highly specialized corner of the internet. It's a blog dedicated to advanced fish keeping, and it's written by an author named Ang.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what's really interesting is that we are examining a moment where a seasoned expert looks at an opportunity, evaluates it, and just walks away.
Right.
The post is titled Part 260, Why the Banded Leporinus Isn't For Me, and it was published on May 19th, 2026.
By the way, the scientific name there is Leporinus fasciatus, just for the fish nerds out there.
Exactly. And this post operates as basically a masterclass in how top-tier creators protect their time.
Yeah.
Because whether you're breeding aquatic life or writing massive software architecture or, like we said, building mechanical watches, your ultimate success is usually defined by the projects you deliberately choose to reject.
Deliberately being the key word there.
Oh.
And to really unpack this, we need to look at the context of where this rejection happens in Ang's journey.
Yeah.
Because this isn't, some beginner getting overwhelmed at the pet store. The post we are looking at is actually part 260 of an ongoing series of documentation.
Which is just a staggering amount of data.
It really is. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in the sheer volume of that, but it's critical to understand what building a 260-part data set does to a person's decision-making process.
Right.
Ang sees this fish, the Banded Leporinus, notes that it looks familiar, and instead of just buying it on impulse, they actually check their archives.
Which most people never do.
Right. And they discover they had already evaluated this exact species way back in Part 96. And the answer back then was a hard no.
What's fascinating here is the dynamic of relying on past constraints to bypass present-day decision fatigue.
Yeah, tell me more about that.
Well, by the time someone reaches entry 260 in a technical journal, they haven't just documented their successes, they have mapped out their own failure states.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
They've built a personalized algorithm for what drains their energy.
I do have to challenge that a bit, though.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't checking a note from years ago and just blindly following it a little, rigid?
How do you mean?
Well, the author notes this earlier evaluation happened quite some moons ago. People change, right?
Sure.
Their skills improve, their income changes, maybe their living situation adapts. If I rejected a project 3 years ago because I didn't have the technical chops to pull it off, maybe today I do.
That's a very fair point.
Doesn't rigidly trusting past you present you from evolving?
That is a fair challenge. And if the rejection was purely based on, a skill deficit, you would be absolutely right.
Okay.
But there's a crucial difference between a temporary skill deficit and a permanent structural constraint. When we look closely at the source material, Ang isn't saying, I don't know how to breed this fish. They're pointing to a specific set of environmental and philosophical filters that literally haven't changed.
So the boundary is still valid.
Exactly. The database they built protects them against shiny object syndrome. That momentary burst of inspiration you get when you see something new in a store.
Oh, I get that all the time.
Right. The notes act as a circuit breaker, forcing the creator to verify if their fundamental constraints have actually shifted or if they are just, bored and looking for a distraction.
So it's basically a diagnostic tool. And that leads us right into the specific diagnostic criteria Eng actually uses, which they lay out very clearly in the post.
Right. The trifecta?
Yeah, the trifecta of constraints.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Eng admits the Banded Leporinus is a unique and intriguing fish, it fails to pass these three filters: space, cost, and overall aesthetic. Let's tackle the first two, because on the surface they seem like obvious physical walls. Space and cost.
They are physical walls, but to understand why they're such massive deal breakers for a breeder, we really need to look at the mechanics of what breeding a larger aquatic species actually entails.
Yeah.
It is fundamentally different from simply buying a fish and dropping it into a display tank in your living room.
Right. Break that down for us, because why is the space requirement for breeding so exponentially larger than just keeping?
Well, when you keep a single large fish, you manage the biological load of one animal.
Simple enough.
But when you commit to breeding that same species, you're essentially launching an industrial aquaculture facility inside your home.
Wow. Industrial.
Truly. You need the primary breeding tank, which for a larger species must be massive to mitigate territorial aggression.
Because they might fight?
Exactly. But that's just the beginning. Once the fish spawn, you might have hundreds, sometimes thousands, of fry.
And those fry, the baby fish, they can't just stay in the same tank as the parents, usually, right?
No, absolutely not. The parents might eat them. So now you need multiple grow-out tanks.
Oh, man.
And as those hundreds of fry grow, their biological output skyrockets. This means your filtration systems have to scale up dramatically to handle the massive spikes in ammonia and nitrates.
So the nitrogen cycle of your water becomes this highly volatile puzzle you have to solve constantly.
Yes. You're doing constant large volume water changes just to prevent toxicity. And then there's the cost multiplier.
Because you're feeding thousands of mouths now.
Right. You aren't just feeding 2 adult fish anymore. You are likely running separate, continuous cultures of live foods, like brine shrimp hatcheries, just to keep the fry alive during their critical growth phases.
So the infrastructure required scales exponentially, not linearly. Okay, that paints a much clearer picture. It is not just about measuring the dimensions of a glass box to see if it fits in your basement.
No, not at all.
It's about managing an exponentially scaling biological system. So space and cost are inextricably linked to the sheer volume of life you are trying to sustain.
Spot on.
But this brings me to my biggest point of friction with Eng's source material, the third constraint.
Aesthetics.
Yes.
Well,
That's next. And I am going to push back hard on this being included in the same breath as space and filtration infrastructure.
Okay, let's hear it.
If Eng is this hardcore, seasoned breeder running what you just described as an industrial biological facility, shouldn't they be above worrying if the fish is pretty? I mean, if the goal is the challenge of the breed, shouldn't the biological puzzle take precedence over the overall aesthetic? It feels incredibly subjective, almost frivolous, to put it next to hard costs like water volume and food.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it seems subjective until you connect it to the daily reality of that biological facility we just described. Aesthetic isn't a frivolous luxury in this context. It is the emotional subsidy that pays for the grueling physical labor.
Emotional subsidy. I like that phrase. Elaborate on that.
Think about the physical toll of what we just discussed. Let's say it's 11 p.m. on a Tuesday.
Ugh, the worst time.
Right. Your back aches, your hands are soaked in tank water, you are hauling heavy buckets to perform an emergency water change because a biofilter crashed in one of the grow-out tanks.
Sounds miserable.
It is, and the purely intellectual puzzle of breeding won't get you through that night. Pure discipline eventually runs out.
Yeah, willpower is finite.
Exactly. What gets you through the monotonous, exhausting maintenance phases of any complex project is a deep, visceral, almost obsessive love for the thing you are bringing into the world.
But Eng literally described the Banded Leporinus as unique and intriguing. So it's not like it's an ugly fish to them.
Yeah.
They clearly find it visually interesting.
Intriguing is a fantastic quality for an afternoon at a museum.
Okay, true.
But it is a terrible foundation for a multi-year commitment. Intriguing might make you stop scrolling and read an article, but it will not make you haul water at midnight.
Oh, wow. That is a great point.
The aesthetic resonance has to be high enough to offset the friction of the process. If you are going to dedicate massive amounts of your limited physical space and your finite financial resources to a project, the subject must command your absolute visual fascination.
Or else what?
If the look of the animal doesn't thrill the breeder, the practical costs will suddenly feel twice as heavy, and the project will inevitably be abandoned.
That distinction right there between intriguing and fascinating is incredibly sharp. It's really the difference between mild curiosity and true conviction.
Exactly.
If I look back at our earlier analogy, it's like a master watchmaker looking at a digital smartwatch. The watchmaker might find the microprocessors unique and intriguing from a technological standpoint.
Sure, they can respect the engineering.
Right, they respect it. But the aesthetic, the soul of that digital screen, doesn't resonate with their deep love for mechanical mainsprings and brass gears.
So they aren't going to dedicate the next year of their life to building one from scratch.
Precisely. They recognize it has value, but they also recognize it doesn't align with their specific aesthetic fuel.
And Aang knows their own threshold. They understand that without an overwhelming visual reward, the immense friction of the breeding process for this specific fish will just eventually lead to burnout.
Yeah.
This level of self-regulation is what separates people who consistently finish complex projects from people who start a dozen things and abandon them when the initial novelty wears off.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this sets us up perfectly to look at the massive philosophical shift Aang makes at the very end of this blog post.
It's a great conclusion.
All these logistical constraints, the water volume, the food costs, the visual appeal, they force Aang to articulate a much deeper truth about their identity as a creator. Aang concludes the post by stating that some fish are great for keeping, but just aren't meant for breeding.
Right.
And then they drop the real realization. Their true passion lies entirely in the challenge of breeding itself, rather than just the act of fish keeping.
This raises an important question because it is the ultimate distinction between process and product. Keeping is the passive enjoyment of the product. Breeding is the active struggle of the process.
And this is where the specific details of aquatic pets fall away and we hit a universal truth. Let's pull this completely out of the fish tank.
Let's do it.
This is really about how we navigate modern consumerism versus actual creation. If you think about the keeper, their dopamine hit comes from possession. They want the finished result in their environment.
Right. The art collector who buys the painting or the person who buys the finished mechanical watch.
Exactly. They appreciate the beauty, but their interaction with the object is fundamentally passive.
And we should clarify, there is absolutely no failure in being a keeper. The world needs appreciators. The failure only occurs when you misunderstand your own motivations.
Exactly. The friction happens when you are fundamentally a breeder, a creator, but you start acting like a keeper.
Yes.
If we look at Aang, their joy isn't in just looking at a fish. If you handed Aang a perfectly healthy, fully grown Banded Leporinus and said, here, put this in your tank and just look at it, it wouldn't satisfy them.
Because for a true creator, possessing the final product is almost boring.
Yeah. The joy, the actual lifeblood of their passion, is in the messy, difficult, frustrating process of making the thing exist. Staring at the blank canvas, solving the nitrogen cycle, machining the microscopic watch gears.
This creates a fascinating diagnostic tool for anyone listening. We currently live in an era of unprecedented visual and informational overload.
Oh, totally.
Every single day, algorithms serve us thousands of flawless end results. We see a meticulously restored mid-century home, a thriving organic farm, a perfectly coded app that runs seamlessly.
It's everywhere. Instagram, Pinterest, you name it.
Because we are constantly bombarded with these highly curated final products, we suffer from a sort of cognitive dissonance. We repeatedly confuse the desire to have the result with the desire to do the work.
Oh, man, that is painfully accurate. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've watched a documentary on woodworking and suddenly thought, I need to buy a lathe and make my own furniture.
Right. We've all been there.
But I don't actually want to learn about wood grains or deal with sawdust in my lungs or spend months failing to cut a proper dovetail joint.
Of course not.
I just want a beautiful dining table. I want the harvest, but I absolutely despise the digging.
And that realization, admitting that you despise the digging, is exactly what Aang achieved by checking those notes and walking away from the Leporinus.
Yeah.
Aang possesses the self-awareness to separate passive consumption from active creation. They looked at this fish and realized, this animal offers me no biological puzzle that fits within my constraints. It only offers me a final product to look at. Therefore, it serves no utility in my life. It is merely a distraction from the work I actually want to do.
A distraction. By clearly defining what they do not want to breed, Aang is aggressively protecting their limited resources, their basement space, their budget, and most importantly, their daily mental energy. They're saving all of that for the highly complex projects that actually provide that deep satisfaction.
They are guarding the gate to their own focus.
Guarding the gate. I love that. You don't just let an ambitious project into your life because someone else says it's cool or because it looks intriguing on a screen.
No, you demand that the project validates the grueling process it will inevitably require.
And that level of clarity, that ability to ruthlessly guard your focus, does not happen by accident. It is a direct result of the practice we discussed in the very beginning.
The documentation, the note-taking.
Exactly. Aang didn't just study the biology of the fish. They meticulously studied their own internal reactions to the friction of the hobby. They gathered data on their own failures and apathies and used that data to build boundaries.
So what does this all mean for you?
Yeah. Bringing this directly to you, the listener. Let's synthesize exactly how you can apply this to the chaotic, overloaded demands of your own pursuits.
It starts with your own records.
We started by examining the sheer power of documenting your own boundaries. Aang didn't rely on memory. They built a localized data set over 260 entries that allowed them to consult their past self.
Right. Effectively short-circuiting present-day decision fatigue and preventing the same mistakes.
From there, we dissected the specific filters required to properly evaluate an opportunity. We looked beyond the obvious physical limitations of space and cost.
Recognizing that if a project requires immense logistical scaling, the biological or mechanical load will eventually crush you.
Yeah. And we explored why the subjective factor, the overall aesthetic or the emotional resonance of the project, is actually the most critical load-bearing pillar.
It's the necessary emotional subsidy that fuels your discipline when the work becomes monotonous.
Finally, we broke down the vital distinction between the passive consumption of keeping and the active, arduous challenge of breeding.
The realization that desiring a beautiful final product is completely different from craving the brutal process of creating it.
Which leaves you with a framework to audit your own life. Look closely at the projects sitting half-finished on your desk right now, or the hobbies you keep buying gear for but never actually start.
Are you secretly a keeper, forcing yourself to play the role of a breeder?
Are you in love with the idea of the finished watch but absolutely miserable sitting at the workbench?
It is a profound relief to finally admit when you only want the result.
It really is.
It allows you to step back, appreciate the work of others, and stop wasting your own capital and guilt on processes you genuinely dislike. It clears the board.
It frees up all that stranded energy so you can go find the specific struggle you actually want to endure. Find the process where the friction itself feels like a reward.
What's the ultimate goal?
Which brings us to one final thought to mull over today. Think about your own version of Aang's Part 96. If you were to dig through your own old journals or scroll back through the abandoned project files on your hard drive, what rejected ideas would you find?
And more importantly, if you applied today's trifecta of constraints to those old rejections, would they still hold up?
Have you actually built a disciplined framework for saying no? Or are you just waiting for the next intriguing distraction to come along?
It's a tough question to answer.
Something to think about the next time you find yourself staring at a beautiful result, wondering if you have what it takes to survive the process.